Welcome to J Lowe Artist. Today we're going to be drawing with ink. We'll have a Pigma Micron pen, #2 pencil, and a kneaded eraser on some good drawing paper. We'll be drawing from a reference, and just so you know, as you draw and as you learn to draw, especially with ink, lots of different techniques, lots of different ways to do it. Hopefully, as you practice, maybe you'll find your own voice and you'll come up with some wonderful drawings that are you. So come along and draw with me today.
So we start out simple shapes, and of course simple shapes in most buildings are rectangles, squares, triangles, that kind of a thing. So I'm just going to start out and say, well, I want the water. Probably going to give myself a little bit more space for water. So I want it down in here somewhere, which means my building's going to start back down in there. I've got enough room for grass and the shoreline. And then here's a wall over here, which means my main building's going to be right up in here somewhere. The cool thing about buildings is there's really no pressure to get everything exactly right. You do your best, but then if it's slightly off, it's not that big of a deal. And it's not so important, too, that everything is totally perfect to begin with, because we'll adjust it. Even where the windows go and everything, you just kind of put them where you feel like they need to go, and then we can adjust it. You can look at it. Sometimes as you're drawing along, you're like, nope, not in the right place. You can adjust it. No detail, just simple shapes. And all that texture up in there with the stone, that's what's going to give us the value that we need there. The more mark you make, the darker the value. And then we'll do the trees and everything along there. This is nice because we have various types of trees. We've got some conifers, some pine trees, and some other types of trees there. The grass and the water. And that's really all you got. If you wanted to, I suppose you could put some of these mountains back in there if you want to. It's not that big of a deal because sometimes they become a little distracting. So I'm cutting off our right side here just a little bit in favor of making it a little taller. When you're ink drawing, you want to concentrate on the darkest areas. So I might start up here at the very top. There's this little tower that's kind of falling apart up at the very top there. And whenever you do rock or brick, some of that is very light. So you don't want to do a straight line down it. So what I'm going to do is I can see where my pencil was. I'm just going to start little dark edges and just do little dots and dashes.
So let me zoom into that so you can see what I'm doing.
So up here at the top, just little dots and dashes. I'm just going to do little scribbles too. And I'm just going to try to get the little dark edges, whatever I see. And it's not a big deal. It's not exactly right. Little hatched lines to create some dark edges. And then where my edge is right here, instead of drawing a line down here, I'm just going to take my pen and I'm going to do these little dots and dashes in kind of horizontal fashion because that represents the brick or the rock that's made out of. So you just kind of go back and forth like this as you go down. And wherever you stop, that is the edge of the building. So you can see my edge kind of developing right there. No reason to have to draw a line there because sometimes even if you come down here and you go, oh, my edge is over here, and then you look up and go, oh, nope, that's not where my edge is. You can always add a little bit more and bring it out so that it is even. If you draw a line, you're stuck with it. This is what makes ink drawing so frustrating to people, is they don't know how to get not stuck to it. And this is it. This is the secret. No secret. It's just that nobody ever taught you how. Nobody taught me how. I had to figure this out myself by looking at other artists and going, hey, you know what? They didn't draw that edge. And everybody kind of looks at that and says, oh, I get it. That's rock or brick. And this is also very therapeutic. So again, these are just little dots and dashes, and I can come back in, I can use little dots to kind of make that line straight there. Don't draw everything in. You don't need to. I'd imagine somewhere along there is a window, just because that's probably your staircase right there on the end. And as we get down, all of a sudden we're going to come down to where these trees are. Let me show you how to do these trees. We're going to do these trees and these trees all the same. The pine trees are a little different. So as we come down, we're going to allow the trees to become our pattern. So up at the top here, where the trees are, I'm just going to do these little M's, little M shapes. And some of them go this way, some of them go straight, some of them go this way. So they're not all going in the same direction. And wherever my edge of my building is, I just stop. You can tell people where the edge of that building is with a few little dots or dashes. But that's your trees. Just these little bumps. And sometimes you just leave out little areas. You can even have, like up here, you can have just a couple little bumps just hanging out up there, because limbs do that. They kind of come up, leaves come off there, but the limbs are thin enough that you can't see them from a distance. So it doesn't all have to be attached to anything. And then down here I have a wall with a little arrow loop, a little crenellation in it that's kind of dark. So I'm just going to throw that in with little dots and dashes. And if it needs to go a little darker, I can make it darker. By just adding a little bit more line to it. And then continuing on, here's some more tree over here. There's another one that comes down. Here's some more tree. And you can always come back into it later and add more stuff to it. So when in doubt, leave it out. You can always come back in later. Fuzzy, soft little trees. And that's really it. The wall, you can continue the wall down with just little dots and dashes. And little meandering. A meandering is where you kind of go like this, back and forth. This is meandering. And so what I do when I do brick is I kind of do back and forth, little skips. Sometimes you'll bring some down. So you can kind of meandering through like these little brick kinds of things, back and forth. And just use little dots and dashes. Sometimes you need darker edges, so just a couple little more dots and dashes. Here's some rock. Whenever you draw old buildings that have been around a while, you'll notice that any time that water would flow out, like when it rains or snows, and that water collects, you get minerals deposited there. And over the space of a couple hundred years, it's going to get darker down in there. So all those little dark areas that kind of look like they're dripping down from there are like those deposits. And then also you get moss growing there. So that's what that little dark edge is. You just know it's going to be there. So just little dots and dashes. I try to go very horizontal because that's the way the brick are laid. So my lines become very horizontal like that. Dots and dashes, little meanderings. Like I say, you can always add more. Once you get the style and the technique, you can go pretty quick. I'm not exactly sure what is up here. I think they're like parts of chimneys and things that have kind of fallen apart. So you just kind of leave them kind of sketchy up in there. And again, little dots and dashes sometimes is all you need. There is a roof there, just a little one. Sometimes when you're doing windows, and I know it's really hard to see windows, but right in here, there's a fairly large window. And so I'm just going to do a number 7 kind of thing, where you kind of delineate the top, the part of the wall that is in shadow, and in this case, it's right there. And then you just kind of hatch through it, that shape of the rectangle. And if there's panes in there, sometimes you can hatch through less because there's glass on there. Or sometimes you just put little dots and dashes to show that there's like wooden panes or separations in there. And that's it. There's your window. It's all about experience too, folks. I don't expect you to be great artists. But I expect you to do your best and learn from it, appreciate it, whatever it is. Most of the time when I draw old buildings, especially those in ruin, I have no idea what I'm drawing. Parts of them, anyway. And so I just draw the darks and lights, and whatever it is will come through. And oftentimes, after I've done drawing, I'll look at it and go, oh, okay, I know what that is. Not really sure. I think this is a chimney over here. Comes up there. Probably the main chimney. Here's the side of that building. Again, I'm imagining there's a straight line right there. I'm just going to pretend that my brick are right there, and I just end, and that will define the edge of that building. Sometimes we're not defined by lines, but by dots and dashes. And again, if we drew a line, we'd be stuck with it. When you scribble, especially where the rock is kind of falling apart, you can do the same kinds of things you did with trees, but it's just kind of up and down scribbling. You can do little circles if you wanted to as well. Anything to get that texture, because you're just explaining to your audience what in the world that is made out of using little dots and dashes, little lines. Figured out. Here's those trees down at the bottom. I'm just going to do all this on this little edge over here and do these little trees. And let me show you how to do pine trees. There's a pine tree that comes up right here. And really, all it is scribbling in the direction that the needles would normally float. And they all flow up. Pine needles always go up. So I'm just going to start with that middle section and just go scribble, scribble, scribble. There's the middle section. Here's the little sides. And I'm just scribbling in the direction that the pine tree would grow. Scribble, scribble, scribble. And some of it I leave nice and light, and others I scribble through it and make sure it's dark. That's your pine tree right there. I'll zoom into that so you can see it easier. Scribble, scribble, scribble. Again, sometimes you can just leave those branches kind of hanging out there, not really attached to anything. Little dots or dashes. And then it goes down into my other trees, and those are little rounded M's, if you will. And again, where it's light, leave it out. Where it's darker, add more. Farther things get away from you, less line you're using as well. So that gives it the illusion that it's in the distance. As things get farther away, they get lighter, less contrast, hazier, and if you're using color, they get bluer. And inside the tree is just some dots and dashes, and that'll make them look kind of fluffy. Remember, the lighter you want things, the less line you use. The heavier, the more line. So any of this brick, I'm just going to go back and forth. And if it's a little darker, I kind of concentrate on that area. Just want to put in the dark areas. Just enough. Just enough to let people know what it is. Can always come back in later. There's a little arched doorway at the bottom. That's kind of romantic. It's probably the postern gate, meaning the back door. Everybody has a postern gate. It's the way you get out in case your enemies get in. Leave yourself a place of retreat. I want to get down to the water part to show you how to do the water. The water is really very simple. The calmer the water, the more simple it is. If you've got little waves like this, it takes a little bit more. But I'm going to do the little brush here. And again, this is just lines going up in the direction that the brush or the grass is flowing. It's little lines up and down. So there's the grass. And it's not always going in the same direction. Sometimes you have some going left and some going right. And usually along the shore, it's a little darker. Where the water is makes everything wet. Plus you get grass growing there. Or minerals deposited there. Moss. So you often get a little bit darker there. Rocks are just shapes of darkness, so I can just go in and scribble in. Here's a rock over here. Here's another rock. But if they're light, you just leave them out. And they can just be kind of floating. They don't have to be attached to anything. Everybody understands what that is. When you're ready for the water, you just kind of figure out where the darkest areas are. So the reflection of the tower here, down here in the water, is down here. So all I'm going to do is just go back and forth, very, very lightly, kind of skipping across the surface. And it's very similar to what we've done before, but I'm trying to be as level as I can. Just back and forth. And if you waver a little bit, that's okay, because there's waves in there. And that's your water, just back and forth. Water lays very linear, and even the waves go very linear. If it's lighter, just less line. And if it's a little darker, you just put a little bit more line in there. You can overlap. You can do more, you can do less. That's your water. Piece of cake. If the water is a little rougher, you might have to go in and scribble in some dark areas, because your waves are going to create some darker shapes in there. So you could go in there and create some waves if you wanted to. Little darker areas. Just little zigzags. This is part of a wall that's fallen down over here, and so it's really, I'm not really sure what the rock looks like, but I can see the dark edge. Just going to put in the dark edge. One thing I do want to do, as soon as you can, I'm probably to that point, is get rid of your graphite. So any of that drawing part that you put in there needs to go. All the graphite does is make it kind of muddy. Once you do that, it gets nice and clean. You start losing edges. Good place for a signature would be right in that light area, maybe down there where the water is, or there in the grassy area. Well, this was pretty fast and sketchy, but that's kind of the idea with ink, is that you've got to, you kind of scribble through it and trying to convey textures and values to your audience in the most appropriate and best way. And sometime, hopefully, you can come up with your own way of doing it, your own voice. But it just takes practice, takes time, takes a little bit of experimentation. And I've always said, this is the beauty of life as far as art goes. There's not one way to do it, lots of different ways to do it. You got to find what's best for you and for your audience. It kind of depends. And if you're just doing it for yourself and you don't care who sees it, that's okay too. But remember, art is not art until somebody sees it. Art requires an audience. Any kind of art, whether it's music or dance or whatever. Got to have an audience. Otherwise, it's just practice. Which is kind of what this is anyway. It's just kind of practice. So much more we could do to this. But we had a lot of fun. Hope you had fun. Hope you learned something. And hopefully, somewhere along the way, it's made your life a little bit nicer. Because art makes life better.